Now, African bodies such as the Southern African Development Community and Africa Union have been highly criticized for their response to the coronavirus pandemic, particularly when it comes to vaccine procurement. The vaccine rollout was always a race. The country that achieves herd immunity first will reap the global tourism pent-up demand. It's a sorry state that Africa is reduced to a begging continent, unable to procure vaccines for its own people, depending once again on the goodwill of the world's aid and not trade. Now, the effects of the pandemic have proven to be devastating to both the production and demand sides of the economy. Africa is not poor, just poorly managed. That's according to University of the Free State Chancellor, Professor Bonang Mohale, who joins us now. Professor Mohale, thank you so much for joining us. A very good morning to you. You say that Africa is not poor. And there's proof that Africa is not poor because it's rich in resources. If we look at the different parts of Africa, Zambia, known for its copper, Ghana, the largest gold producer, Nigeria for its oil, there's proof that Africa is not poor, but yet what is reflected doesn't support that backing.
Mempo, thank you for having me, and Notata Ubuhle, you're absolutely correct. I think Africa is poor by choice, not by divine intervention. And if we want to address the challenges of Africa, we have to start right at the beginning, the root cause, which is leadership, not just management. Here is a continent of 1.3 billion people, 55 countries, 54 of them absolutely sovereign, 30.4 million square kilometers when you include the associated islands, and it speaks 3,000 languages with a combined continental GDP of 2.6 trillion US dollars. So if you divide that by the 1.3 billion people, there's no reason why anybody in Africa should go to bed hungry. This continent is the second largest, but also the second most populous after Asia. This is the only continent in the world where you can look at Ms. Tourist and Mr. Tourist and say, anything that you want, we have it in abundance. This is the continent that is unique with diversity, culture, fauna and flora. And in fact, it is so unique that we can say it has a pink lake in Tanzania. It has the tallest land mammal, the giraffe, the biggest, the elephant. The longest river in the world, the Nile, is found here. And indeed, the biggest desert, the Sahara, is found here. The only continent that is transected by the two altitudes, the meridian and the equator. It is bang in the middle of the continent. In fact, it is centrally located, therefore it is easier to come to, unlike what is depicted in terms of just the world map. This is truly God's own country. Every mineral that the world needs is found in abundance here as either number one or number two. And if I can rattle one or two of some of these minerals, the DRC is widely accepted to be the richest country in the world in terms of mineral reserves. Diamonds, gold, cobalt, copper, etc. And yet, its people are poor. There's no infrastructure. There are no roads because of the choices of the leaderships that they have. Zambia at the ZCCM, at the copper belt. At one instance, it used to be the world's fourth largest copper producer. Now it is still the 11th. Copper is used in electrical conduction, in roofs, in construction, etc. The same with Namibia. I mean, Namibia has both diamonds, but also it also produces uranium, just like Niger, that is used in electricity generation. 70% of the world's cocoa beans are found in just 4 West African countries in terms of Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon. In fact, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire account for 50% of the world's coffee. Thank you, sir.
Professor, you mentioned the fact that, Africa is poor by choice as a result to leadership. Are you referring to bodies such as the AU and SADC?
No, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the current crisis we are having in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, here is a country that has enough gas reserves, more than 20 trillion cubic feet of gas. This gas is almost the same quantities as Qatar, and yet Qatar is able to look after its people. It's amongst the richest in the United Arab Emirates. The Frelimo government bet the kitchen sink and everything on this gas, and they lost out. The African Union was aware since 2017 that there is a war going on, and only in the last week is the African Union, together with South Africa, sending some troops to go and put a little bit of instability. This is a country that, since Jonas Savimbi died, was at war for 3 decades. Its people were hoping for peace. Most South Africans go to the old Lorenzo Max, now Maputo. It's a 4-hour drive from South Africa, the best prawns that you can find indeed in the continent. Some of the warmest waters, some of the most glorious, beautiful islands for holidays. And South Africans love that. Now we've had more than 30 caught in this internal strife, one of them actually deceased. So if we had decisive leadership, not just waiting for the United Nations, Africans are good at having a conversations around the table. Since 2017, we haven't even done that. If I come to South Africa, our own country, I mean, here is a country that is truly gifted in so many things. It is the most diverse economy. Its banking systems used to be amongst the top 5 in the world, an independent South African Reserve Bank, effective and efficient, knows how to deliver mega projects on time and in full compared to the other continents, has an infrastructure of roads that rivals the best in Europe. In the last 27 years, all we had to do was just to maintain it. The 4th largest electricity utility in the world in Eskom, it used to produce the cheapest electricity in the world at its heydays. In 2007, won the global award for the best run utility in the world in terms of kilowatts per hour. And now we find ourselves in the spot of bother. The top 10 economies in Africa, it's Nigeria at $448 billion, followed by South Africa at $351 billion. Egypt is the 3rd largest at 303. And again, you do the math. You say, but why is it that 70% of the world's poor are found in this continent? Of the 1.4 billion people out of 7.8 billion people in the world, are found, 648 million of them are found in Africa. And by the way, it's called the dark continent, not because we don't have electricity, but because for thousands of years, even though this continent was inhabitable,
Professor, if you'll allow me, just for the sake of time, so we can utilize you to the best of our ability, the continent continues to find itself in this vicious cycle of abject poverty. And you speak about the rich mineral resources and, what the continent has, but yet surely it speaks to something else here, something more intricate when it comes to what is being exported and imported and the final product, the finished product, and how that business model is working to the detriment of the continent. Give us more clarity on how exactly that works.
So, Mempo, you are absolutely correct. So, by and large, in all these centuries, the African economy has been mostly extractive. So, we go to the belly of the mine. The deepest mine in the world is in Bonang at 4 kilometers. South Deep is the 4th largest and deepest mine in the world. We used to employ 900,000 people in our gold mines. Now it's 450,000. And we take the gold, we export it raw as it is, same with the diamonds. Other countries, mostly Europe, beneficiate it. We then bring it back at almost 10 times the cost, and thereby creating jobs in Europe and mostly in the US of A, and condemning our own people to this that you are talking about, the self-perpetuating vicious cycle of abject poverty. And yet we have the highest unemployment probably in the world. South Africa, with a narrow definition, is 30.5% of the population that's unemployed. In absolute numbers, it's 11 million people. 16 million people were gainfully employed pre-COVID, and yet 18 million people are on social security. And we say our biggest challenge is to create an employment. 60% of young people, 24 years and younger, are not in education, employment, or even in trading. Therefore, the elements that were present during the Arab Spring are here imminent and absolutely urgent. Why Alexander has not gone up in flames, we can put it only to the patience of our own people. So Soweto has a population of 3.5 million people, bigger than Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini, other countries. And yet, it doesn't have any economic activity. For 27 years, we've been talking about the township economy, and we're not doing much. And yet we are endowed not only with mineral resources, but with absolute beauty. The biggest waterfall in the continent is Musiwa Trunya, which the locals shows to Cecil John Rose. And then he gets excited. He says, no, I'm going to call it after my queen. And today we still call it the Victoria Falls, which is 1.6 kilometers wide. It plunges at the Batoka Gorge at 108 meters. And it has enough power to produce hydroelectric electricity for the rest of the continent, and we export. The DRC has the second hydroelectric potential in the continent.
Professor,
we build...
Let's talk vaccines.
Yes, my dear brother.
Apologies to interrupt you. Let's quickly talk vaccines. In the piece that you penned in the Daily Maverick, you mentioned that we are reduced to beggars as the African continent. Just let us into why you say that.
So let's start with South Africa, which is the most complex. Up until now, we haven't administered a single vaccine that we bought, not one. The 80,000 batches that are coming at the Johnson & Johnson's, where we are part of the trial. So we bought the AstraZeneca one. It gets delivered to us on the 1st of February. And then we look at it and say, oh, it has a short expiry date of 6 months. That 6 months then gets reduced to the end of April. And then we decide to take it back. Up until now, we still haven't bought anything. On paper, we say we've bought 31 vaccines from Johnson & Johnson's, which might be made in the Aspen factory here in Tebeja. This is the old Aspen, which used to be owned, the old Lennon's, which used to be owned by the government, now modern day Aspen Pharmaceuticals. And then we say we're going to buy 20 doses from Pfizer. But none of them have actually arrived. And we set ourselves, and through the president, a herd immunity target of 67%. That's 40 million people in January. You do the math. We were supposed to be vaccinating 100,000 people a day, every day. And we said by the end of March, we'd have vaccinated 1.2 million frontline healthcare workers. End of March came. How many have we vaccinated? 250,000. What we should have done in 2 days. We are now in April. That target, if we wanted to finish it, by the way, in January, had we done 100,000, it would have taken us 400 days or 13.3 months. So we were planning to finish only in 2022, which means we agitated and orchestrated that in winter, especially precipitated by the huge travel around Easter, that actually we are laying ourselves for the third wave. So we planned it that way because we haven't gotten anywhere in vaccinating the large population. So where we are now in April, by the time we start towards the end of April, we should be vaccinating not 100,000 a day now, 250 to 300,000 a day. We'll still finish in 2022. And I say, but the vaccine was always a race. Because a country like Israel and the US of A, that will say, you know what, we have achieved herd immunity. We have now defeated the virus like New Zealand does. The pent-up tourism demand will go to those countries. We still have probably 28 countries that have banned South Africans from traveling. And yet we know that our hospitality sector and indeed tourism sector is dependent on international travel because we haven't really cultivated our own domestic travel. Tourism pre-COVID was 9.8% of the GDP. It could be 20 because of the beauty and the diversity that we have. Now it has come down to 7%. Lastly, as I conclude, Mempo, we have lost 3.2 million jobs. We have created 750,000. We put on plan that will create probably another 650,000 job opportunities in 3 years. Net, we have lost 2.2 million jobs. You multiply that by 5 people on average, that our dependents, no wonder we have more than 10 million people that are unemployed. So I think, honestly, what Africa needs now, yes, it's leadership more than anything else. Number 2 is to realize that together we can achieve more. We need to cooperate and collaborate, not compete. We need to create roads that connect the continent. As it is today, it's very difficult to travel from east to west or vice versa. It takes you days, a trip that should take you no more than 2 hours by flight. We need to ensure that we reimagine, repurpose, but reopen our economy to have more inclusivity, to have more fourth industrial revolution types of skills. We also need to ensure that we have more of what we call basic human rights, that we are able to look after the healthcare of our own citizens, that we are able to take our own kids to school, that indeed we are supposed to provide safety and security for our own people. You go to the DRC now, there are some areas where you can go to. You go to Maputo and indeed to Mozambique, you'll be taking a risk with the strife that is going. You go to some townships in South Africa with hijackings, with crime that is really spiraled. We are not providing that security. But if we join hands with the private sector, if we execute on the public-private partnerships, therein lies our hope. We don't have to take the credit just as government. The private sector knows how to deliver project management, mega projects on time, on budget, and in full. And that's what we've been doing. Kusile, Midupe, and the mighty Ingula have demonstrated to us that we have missed our own targets. The duration has doubled. The cost has more than trebled. And indeed, up until today, our electricity is still unstable and indeed unreliable. And we know that electricity is the fourth means of production. Babubushe, Lemempo, anything else?
I think we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much. You really have educated and informed us and the viewers. University of the Free State Chancellor, Professor Bonang Mohale, saying that Africa is not poor. It is merely poorly managed. Still to come.